I'm also very passionate about accessibility and inclusion. It's personal for me. As somebody who identifies as a person with a hearing loss, this means that I have to be very proactive when it comes to entering spaces as a learner as well as a teacher.
To me, inclusive learning means that we are creating materials and experiences that don't have any barriers.
Inclusive learning means providing all learners a seat at the table.
I honestly think every educator should be an advocate for inclusive learning because it all begins with the same basic general rule for good teaching, and that's all about knowing your students well.
Inclusive learning to me is all about providing educators and students with the tools they need in the learning environment.
I want to create intentionally spaces that would welcome the widest range of learners.
It's only when you know your students academically, socially, emotionally that you can know both what they need and how best to deliver it.
Always providing alternatives or choices for students so that they can be the expert learners they are, and that we're also creating those materials that don't have any built-in barriers accessibility-wise.
With equitable access points for participation in all of the conversations, in all of the work, and in all of the experiences of the greater group at large.
My work with inclusivity and accessibility really begins with one of the classes I teach. We spend a lot of time on the Universal Design for Learning framework and how that can be leveraged with technology to make learning accessible for all learners.
I utilize the principles of universal design for learning, multiple means of action and expression, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of engagement. This is something that my team also takes into account when they plan as well.
As a class, we spend time diving deep into a current lesson, and we learn what's needed to make that lesson accessible for all learners.
Making sure that we have accurate captions or alternate text.
Agendas in advance, multiple opportunities to respond, as well as give people the opportunity to have feedback or give feedback.
Providing variability in lessons and activities helps teachers understand that accessibility and inclusivity is something that all students can benefit from.
We all know by now, hopefully, that technology benefits all students, those with and without disabilities.
My goal is to use technology to make learning accessible and to help other teachers find the tech that works for them with a solid foundation of what it means to be universally accessible and inclusive.
Yes, I personally try to gain expertise in a lot of different things, so I have options for students to demonstrate their mastery of a topic or options to find the right tool for them to express their unique voice in whatever way we can deem necessary.
It's this shared commitment of all stakeholders, including administrators.
We really leverage what are called the POUR principles. We wanted to make sure our websites were perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So all of these things came into play.
Teachers.
We need to also be not just creating these materials and making sure they're accessible ourselves, but also building that into the student creation process. Having them consider the accessibility of what they're creating.
Parents and students.
We had to be very intentional about providing transcription for many of our public meetings, as well as having just print materials and digital materials available for families in multiple languages.
I think it's really worth noting that the first principle of universal design for learning is engagement.
To make sure that technology is one of the main focal points that drives the teaching and the learning process.
But I think inclusive learning goes beyond just providing the access and the tools. It is allowing them to have learning that's personally meaningful to them. And it allows you to make it also intrinsically motivating.
Having them consider, how a user would use what they're creating or experience what they're creating. Because if we build that into the creation experience now, it's going to just be second nature for them.
And that goes beyond learning that's just fun to learning that actually provides a real challenge that forces the students to grow, but does it in a manner that they kind of want to continue even when you're not around.
And it's going to create that future is accessible for all people with disabilities and all people with learning variability, which is all of us. We're all variable in how we learn things.
We're also very intentional about sharing the way that we design things and our norms and protocols with other departments and other teams so that they can implement them as well.
These are all important things to making sure we're not building barriers in our classroom.
I find hope in the fact that I see so many samples of students making learning accessible.
Ultimately, I think inclusive learning includes the same things that make all learning effective generally, which is knowing your students deeply and providing them with a learning experience that works best for them.
We need to make sure that everyone is included in our classrooms, everyone feels safe, everyone feels comfortable, and no one has barriers to what they want to learn.
Inclusion is an interwoven practice to the culture and climate of shared spaces.
We were always learning and growing together, and because of this, we know that we have so much we can look forward to in this fall to continue to implement.
I think this is extremely important. I like to say the future is accessible. As a person with a disability myself, I'd like to see the barriers for students and just in our daily lives come down accessibility-wise.
It should feel like I am seen, I am heard, I matter, and I belong here.